Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. It's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here. In today's offering, you're going to see me share about a 7-minute extract from a class I gave. And I want to tell you a little bit about that before we dive into it. So in today's offering, I'm sharing about the single most important thing that transformed my understanding of astrology and a birth chart and how it works. And the fact that I only learned this when I dove into traditional astrology. And that is about the rulers of the houses. And in the video that you're about to see, you're going to see me go through an example where I take you through the theory and then show you how it works in a chart. And this concept is based on the idea that a planet has a couple of different sets of topics that are associated with it. So you're probably all familiar with the idea that Mercury is associated with communication, for instance. But based on the houses that Mercury signs of Gemini and Virgo are on in your birth chart, Mercury is going to be in charge of some extra topics as well. And those extra topics change from one chart to the other. And it's this idea that totally transformed and I think really improved my understanding of astrology and how I could serve my clients and my students with astrology. And so I want to take you through that concept today. You're going to hear me talk about this in the class that's to follow. It's an extract, I should say. So you're going to hear about a 7-minute section of a longer 90-minute training. I think you'll get the most important points from this 7-minute extract, which is why I want to share it with you today. I hope that it helps you along your journey with astrology. If you want more, if you want the entire training, it's from a webinar class called Rulership of the Houses for Beginners, and it is taking you through how the planets and signs interact with the topics of the houses from this traditional astrology perspective. I'm going to include the link for that class in the notes below. If you are enjoying my content, don't forget to like the video and even subscribe to my channel. And of course, if you want more astrology training and classes on how to work with astrology or how to understand your birth chart, do pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com, where you can find all kinds of astrology classes from beginner to intermediate to more advanced, including my very intimate group mentoring, which is happening. It only happens once a year. So the next kickoff will be September of 2022. So if you're listening to this video before then, details are on the website. But for now, settle in and enjoy this training on the rulers of the houses. So the key here is that what I'm sharing with you today is the single biggest thing that totally transformed my practice of astrology when I learned it. And it's something I only learned through studying traditional forms of astrology. And what I learned is that planets have two kinds of meaning. They have their general or their chart-specific meaning. Now, the general meaning of a planet is probably something you're already familiar with. There are some list of keywords here, which is a beautiful list from Ben Dyke's book, Traditional Astrology for Today. Things like Saturn being about contraction or being cautious or things taking a long time. Jupiter being about expansion or risk-taking or, seeing the big picture. Mars being an activating or an energizing planet, but also a planet that can cut things. Venus being a sweetening, moistening, binding kind of energy. So she's magnetic. She helps pull things together. Mercury being a planet around labeling and names and information. The moon being about intuition and remembering or holding on to things. But the moon was also considered to be one of the most changeable planets. And in traditional astrology, the moon is associated with movement. The sun being a steady, generating, bright, warming force has this kind of bright, steady, warm radiance associated with it. So these are qualities that we could take for each of these planets into any chart that we're looking at. But in addition to these core qualities, Mars about action or Venus about beauty, planets also have what I call chart-specific meaning. And this is where the planets take on specific topics just in your birth chart. So that while Mars might generally be a planet of action, if you have Mars, one of Mars's signs, Scorpio or Aries, on the cusp of the 11th house, then you may actually find that Mars in your chart is in charge of the topic of friendship. So planets are going to have their general qualities and characteristics which they keep, but then they bring their tone to the topics that they're responsible for in your chart. Another example might be the moon. We all think about the moon as being family or home or mother, but if you have Cancer on the 7th house in your birth chart, then the moon is actually going to be a planet that tells us a lot about relationships for you. Now, I've got an example here for Barbara Walters, who is a very well-known American broadcaster, and she has a Cancer midheaven. Now, if you've not seen a whole sign chart before, just take a moment to familiarize yourself with how the chart looks. You can see all the house cusps are 0 degrees of the signs, and you can see that every sign rules one house in the chart, starting with the ascendant sign. The ascendant is marked in the whole sign chart with the AS, and it becomes a floating degree that sits somewhere inside the first house. The midheaven degree is marked as the MC. The degrees of the midheaven and the ascendant are the same in any house system. It's just how they're placed in the format of that house system that might be different. Now, one little trick, and we'll see this a little later on in another example, the MC degree can float around and it may not be in the 10th house, but I'll explain more about that as we get to a chart with that. So for Barbara Walters, who has a Cancer midheaven, the moon is going to be the planet that rules the 10th house and the topics of career for her. Now, you'll notice the moon is not in the 10th house. And this is another distinction between traditional and modern astrology, that in modern astrology, we often say a planet influences a house because it's physically inside it. And a planet in a house does have a level of influence, but it doesn't have the final say. The planet that rules the sign on the cusp of a house is going to have the final say in terms of how you experience that area of life. So for Barbara Walters, a Cancer midheaven, we're going to look around in her chart and see if we can find where the moon is. And that's going to tell us a little bit more about the topic of career. And you can probably see the moon is easy to spot. It's in the sign of Gemini in the 9th house. So it's kind of just next door to the 10th house, if you like. So what the interpretive kind of layering and language is here, the midheaven's in the sign of Cancer and the moon is in the sign of Gemini. So the qualities of the moon in Gemini are going to influence the Cancer midheaven. So we might want to see work that is caring or nurturing because the midheaven's in Cancer, but we're going to do it in a curious or maybe learning or information-oriented way because the moon as the ruler of the midheaven is in an air sign in Gemini. We also get some information because the moon is actually placed in the 9th house. So what we're essentially saying here is that the planet that rules a house via the sign on the cusp is the planet that is responsible for and in charge of the topics of the house. And so in this case, the ruling planet of the midheaven for Barbara Walters is in the 9th house. So work and career is going to have something to do with 9th house topics. And we know the 9th house is to do with travel or international experiences. It can be a teaching or an educational house. It can sometimes have to do with publishing or even wisdom. And so we might say there is a signature here around doing something and exchanging information on a global scale. Moon in Gemini, exchange of information, global scale would be 9th house, and that is relevant to career. So that's a wonderful placement, if you like, for somebody who works as a journalist, is a broadcaster, and has a global or an international reach. You know, Barbara Walters didn't just stay in the States and interview people locally or work on local TV. She worked on national TV and she actually traveled the world interviewing people as part of her role. One of the things Barbara Walters was known for was, you know, having these conversations, moon in Gemini,
professional conversations with people for work where people would often end up being quite emotional or even crying. So you can see the midheaven in Cancer. It's not that she made them cry, it's just that she was able to create a space where they would talk about topics that were more sensitive or emotional for them. So the process here is we look to the midheaven, we see the sign there, we look for the ruling planet of that, and then we look for that planet in the chart. And so this is it's a very simple concept. It can take a while to wrap your head around it, but once you do, it's something that unlocks these threads of intention and motivation and kind of focus within the chart itself.